All right, everybody, welcome to the second video in the FVega.com tutorial series working with Hyper-V. In this video, we're just going to go through the basic setup of creating a new virtual machine, and I'll try and touch on a couple of key topics or key points along the way, but mostly just kind of breeze through it because there's really not much to it. So yeah, let's get started. You see here a Hyper-V Manager. If you don't have it open already, go ahead and open it up. You can do that again by going to your start menu here and just type in Hyper, and that will bring you to the Hyper-V Manager icon, and you can open one up, and that'll bring you here to which is the Hyper-V Manager, which basically shows you what virtual machines you have created, and gives you some additional information there, and some other information with checkpoints, which we'll touch on in a later video. To create a new virtual machine, all you'll want to do is just over here on the right hand side, click New and Virtual Machine. All right. Alternatively, if for some reason you don't see that there, you can also go up here to Action, New Virtual Machine. Same thing. And that'll bring you to the wizard. And the first thing it's going to ask you here is to give it a name. Right? A naming convention can really be anything you want. I typically like to name my virtual machines based off of the operating system that I'm going to be installing, and then also the version of that operating system. So I don't know, we'll just call this one here Windows 10 Pro. That'll work. And I'll choose to, I guess I'll elect to keep it on the default drive or wherever it's stored. And well, actually, you know what? I'll change the location. One thing you want to make sure, though, if you do store it in a different place, you want to make sure that you've got enough free space to allow it to grow and allow the checkpoints to be stored. I am going to elect to move it to a different place just simply because I can never remember where the hell it is. And rather than storing it in the default location and have to go and figure out where the hell it is later, I'd rather just have it stored in a folder I created on my main C drive, Hyper-V VM stuff. Perfect. There we go. So we'll store it there, and we can go to next. And now it's asking us to specify a generation. What the hell does that mean? Well, just like iPhones or your PlayStation or Xbox, they have different generations, right? Every couple of years or so, they'll create a new version with new features. Well, the same thing goes with Hyper-V. There's a couple of different implementations that you can use to create a virtual machine. Generation 1 is, if you're ever unsure of which one to choose, definitely choose Generation 1. It's going to work with any operating system, and it's just basically, it's going to work, right, for the most part, and unless something goes wrong. It's got all of the necessary features that you would typically want or need out of a virtual machine. So like I say, if you're ever unsure, choose Generation 1. Generation 2 does have a couple of extra features. There's really not, like Secure Boot is a feature in Generation 2, and what else? Connecting to SCSI drives. Yeah, those are things that you probably won't need for your typical run-of-the-mill VM. But if you do need that, you can select Generation 2. But obviously, you want to make sure that the host machine that you're installing on, meaning the computer that you're doing this on, has UEFI or UEFI based firmware, and that also the operating system that you're using to create or load into this virtual machine is of the supported operating systems. Now, as far as I know, you can do it with any operating system. I think they say they only support like Windows Server and with 2012 and like Windows 8 and some other things, but as far as I'm aware, most of the features do actually work with Generation 2 on most operating systems anyway. So just a little FYI. Just in case you run into any issues, you will be on your own because I'm not going to be doing a video on that unless people ask me. If you do generation 2 and you run into a problem, you know, do some research, Google, click on this thing to find out some more info. But, you know, if need be, you have any questions, feel free to throw them my way. I'll be able to help you whenever I can. I'm going to choose generation 1, because like I say, for the most part, it always works. And then we'll click next, and that will take us to the memory. How much memory do we want to give this this new computer that we're building here? That's a good question, and one that you want to at least give some thought to, right? You don't want to give it all of your memory, right? If I open up Task Manager here and I go to my Performance tab, you'll see here I have 15.7 gigs of memory installed on my machine, and I'm currently using 4.5. Well, I don't want to give it the remaining 11 gigs of memory. I don't want to give this one virtual machine the rest of my memory. Otherwise, I won't be able to do anything else on my host machine, on my regular computer, right? At the same time, you don't want to not give it enough memory, because if you don't give it enough memory, you know, the operating systems have typically a minimum amount of memory that they need to even run. But then on top of that, you know, you're going to want to use your other machine. You're going to want to use your virtual machine. You're going to want to open applications on there, and you know, do other things which are also going to take up more memory. So you want to make sure you got to find the sweet spot. Now the setting here is not set in stone. You can always go back and change it after you power off your virtual machine. If you're finding that performance on either your host machine or your guest virtual machine is not so great, you can, you know, tweak this later on. So typically, you know, 1 gig is fine for my purposes here for this tutorial. Usually I would probably put it at least 2 gigs, and then use this dynamic memory feature, which is basically going to do some calculations and some things in the background for you, and it's going to increase or decrease the amount of memory usage based off of you know, how the machine is being used, which is very handy. Some people hate it because they, you know, it in turn increases the memory usage and processing power. You know, so some people just like to turn it off and then just set a hard cap. Maybe you know you're not going to use this machine for too much, and you want to give it 1 gig of RAM. And that's it. You know, it's not getting any more. It's not getting any less. It's 1 gig, and that's what it has. You know, you can do it whatever way you want. You know, just make sure, like I say, that you give it some thought, because you know, if you don't think about it and you give it all your memory away, or you don't give it enough, you're going to run into issues later. So for now, we'll just leave this checked and leave that that setting there with 1 gig of RAM for this purpose, and we'll click next. And now is the networking. You know, we've given our virtual machine an allotment of memory. We've created what generation it's going to be and what features to include. And now it's asking us, well, what network adapter do you want to use? Each virtual machine includes a network adapter, is what it says here. You can configure the network adapter to use a virtual switch, or it can remain disconnected. So in the next tutorial, I typically leave it not connected when I'm creating a new virtual machine, and that's just because I'm usually going to be adding and switching up some settings anyways before I install an operating system, and usually one of those settings is you know, the virtual switch, or configuring a virtual switch. You see I have one already set up. But I'm going to leave it disconnected so I can show you guys how to do that in the next tutorial video. And we'll go ahead and click next. And the last piece of the puzzle here is the hard drive, right? You know, we've given it basically everything it needs. Now we want to know, now it needs a hard drive. It needs to be able to store files. It needs to be able to store an operating system and all the data that comes along with that. So, you know, the name is already pre-filled in here for you if you're going to create a virtual hard disk. I recommend not changing it. I mean, you can if you'd like, but you know, typically there's not many reasons why you would want to. You know, maybe you want to change the place where it's stored. Again, same thing as before. Make sure you've got enough space wherever you're storing it. I'm gonna dump it in this folder. And then, how big do you want this hard drive to be? Now, again, keep in mind, this is a virtual machine, right? You're not at Best Buy or online, searching for a new hard drive. We'd all love to, have terabytes of hard drive space, but again, we're restrained to what we have on our host machine. I have 535 gigs free on my host machine, which means I could theoretically assign 535 gigs to this hard disk, and it would work just fine. But of course, I wouldn't be able to save or do anything else on my host machine. So you don't want to do that. You want to use as much hard drive space that you think you're going to need, right? Typically, again, as is with memory, the operating system also has a minimum requirement for how much disk space is available. Like Windows will typically, when it installs the operating system on disk, it'll create a separate recovery partition, which is usually maybe a few megs or a few gigs. And then also the operating system itself is going to take up space, 10, 15 gigs, whatever. So what you want to do, obviously, is account for that. You want to account for the amount of space that the operating system is going to use. And then you want to obviously give yourself some extra room to, store and add files and run programs and do whatever you need. I'll go ahead and set it for 50 for this particular machine. 50 is usually a good number, and I do believe if you want to increase that later, you can always do that. So yeah. Otherwise, if you have an existing virtual machine or virtual hard disk, which looks like I actually do, you can just use that one. And that's what I'll do. I'll just use that one. Otherwise, I'm just going to create another hard drive and use up another 50 gigs. And then you can always obviously choose to do that later, which we could have done in the next video, but I figured we might as well do it now. So click next. We will review the settings and then finish. Created a new virtual machine. Look at that. Awesome, right? Simple, sweet, really easy. Just a couple of things, like I say, that you have to think about in terms of actually getting the machine set up. Obviously, if you start the machine, you can do so by just right-clicking, and then you can connect to it to actually view the, to serve as your monitor, right? But as you see here, you get a boot failure. It's a computer, but it doesn't have an operating system or anything loaded onto it, so you can't really use it or for anything. So that's all fine and dandy, but like I said, I just wanted to show you that it does work, and it is up and running. Now in the next video, we're going to go ahead and load I guess we'll do a Windows 10. We'll load Windows 10 on this virtual machine and get this sucker going and do some other configuration there. So as always, please leave your feedback and comments in the comments section. I'd love to hear back from you guys and figure out how I should be doing these tutorials going forward. And then also be sure to like the video if you did, dislike it if you did not, and then lastly, be sure to subscribe, right? Because I'm going to be dumping out a lot of videos here in the near future. So subscribe so you're kept in the loop, and maybe, who knows, you might learn some new things. So thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next vid.